Welcome to St. John. Nothing Happened Here, with your hosts Greg Marquis and Mark Allen Green, a show all about a little city on the east coast of Canada where nothing ever happened. Except for this.
Let's travel today to September the 7th, 1791, to find out what happened between Munson Hayt and Benedict Arnold after the confrontation in the streets of St. John. We're now inside the Germain Street Episcopal Church in St. John, which doubles as the city's courthouse. We could hear a pin drop, even though every pew is full as if it were Sunday service. The city has come out to hear if justice will be served. This is the first time an accusation of slander has been made in the new colony of New Brunswick, but it won't be the last. One of the two judges straightens his court wig and turns to the jury who has just finished their deliberations. Two men and their legal counsel stand before the court in anticipation, one being Munson Hayt, who is represented by lawyer Elias Hardy. The other is Benedict Arnold, represented by Ward Chipman. Chipman is by far the more prominent of the two barristers. He's Harvard Law educated and is currently the province's Solicitor General. In the 1785 New Brunswick election, Mr. Chipman also happened to be one of the leaders of the Upper Covers, while Mr. Hardy represented the Lower Covers. The barristers are legal and political adversaries, which brings yet another dimension to this trial. One of the judges breaks the silence. Has the jury reached its judgment in the case at bar? The jury foreman holds a parchment in a shaking hand. He clenches his jaw hard. Over the trial, he heard the many accusations made against both Hayt and Arnold, but only the ones against the traitor of the American Revolution are relevant. The foreman heard many witnesses testify to the fire at Arnold and Hayt's warehouse 3 years ago, how it had threatened the entire Lower Cove and almost claimed the life of Arnold's son Henry. Hayt's haunting words echo in the foreman's head. I will convince the court that you, Benedict Arnold, are the greatest rascal that ever was, that you burnt your own store, and I will prove it. As much as it pains the jury to decide so, Hayt fails to deliver on that promise. The foreman hands the judgment to the court clerk, who in turn delivers it to the bench. A judge reads the verdict in silence and hands it to the second judge, who shakes his head. He looks to the foreman. Is this decision unanimous? Clenching his jaw even harder, the foreman replies, It is, my lords. So says ye, the judge declares, the jury finds Mr. Munson Hayt liable for slander against Mr. Benedict Arnold. The courtroom burst into an unruly chorus of jeers. Fists wave wildly toward Mr. Arnold, who stifles a grin. It might be time for us to leave before we're caught up in yet another St. John riot. The judges bang their gavels. Order! I shall have order in my court! Order! The angry voices slowly begin to trail off until silence is restored. The other judge continues. However, the jury recommends a low amount for compensatory damages, and we agree. It is the decision of this bench that Mr. Hayt is to pay Mr. Arnold the sum of 20 shillings. God save the king. Now laughter rings out. The award is a far cry from the 5,000 pounds Arnold had sought. One voice is heard above all the others. Congratulations, General Arnold! 20 shillings is way more than your reputation is worth. This declaration is met with even more laughter. Now it is Arnold who clenches his jaw. There would reportedly be another fire in St. John this very afternoon. Benedict Arnold is burned in effigy in front of his home, followed by, you guessed it, a riot. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm Mark, and Greg is somewhere over there, and that means St. John. Nothing happened here. Benedict Arnold Part 2. Just for fun, Greg, let's do the introduction like a 1980s TV show. So, last time on St. John, nothing happened here. We talked about Benedict Arnold executing daring raids and campaigns, acquiring a new enemy in Ethan Allen, getting shot in the leg during the Siege of Quebec, getting shot in the same leg again during the Second Battle of Saratoga, selling out West Point to the British, and switching sides. Then finally, after the war was over, setting his sights on St. John, New Brunswick to rebuild his fortune and reputation. Okay, that was fun, but Greg, I believe you have a Canadian perspective to put on Benedict Arnold?
Yeah, I don't think there is a single Canadian perspective, but a lot of American listeners would know who Benedict Arnold is, obviously. But from a Canadian point of view, there's probably one more way of looking at him. Again, non-Americans like Canadians sometimes might struggle with how strongly many Americans still continue to view Benedict Arnold like as the worst traitor of all time.
And let's just tie up that Benedict Arnold game, because we kind of lost it at the end. We were giving points along the way for his good character, bad character, whatever. Everything was going on the good camp. Now, the whole West Point, the betrayal of West Point.
Yeah.
Like, in his mind, I think he was doing the right thing, but he got money for it. It wasn't transparent. Yep. Certainly, and saying, you know what, you guys have screwed up here and we got to abandon West Point. So I'm not giving him points for the betrayal of West Point.
Yeah. And, Benedict Arnold was also sending military information to the British before the plot was uncovered, right?
So West Point, you're saying no points against Benedict Arnold for that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say he certainly risked being called a traitor, and the Patriot side had good reason to call him that.
Okay, and then burning of New London. Points against, like, even though he was doing the orders not to do it, you are the commanding officer. You take responsibility for what happened.
Yeah, it might be kind of unfair to him, but things do stick with the commander, rightly or wrongly.
War is fair, right?
No.
Oh, wait a minute.
And wartime propaganda is even less fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
So points against, and I should say points against for even switching sides and being a brigadier general in the British Army. Like, he could have gone, you know what, I've had enough with this. You've lost your way. Yeah. But to actively look for a command position to attack the army that you stood for, it's just like, even if you fell out of favor in all this Congress and everything, that I think he was justified having his beefs, but you don't put on the enemy's uniform and then attack. So points against.
Unless
I like this.
Unless you had to save them from themselves because they're working with the evil French, who are the British are the lesser of two evils. Again, I'm not. Anyway, we could go back and forth with this all day.
You said it was a mixed bag. You said this was a difficult game, and it is, because you could go, oh well, maybe, and we weren't there, right? So, and there's only so much historical analysis we can go through and go, what was in this guy's mind? Was he doing the right thing under his own narrative? And maybe he was. Yeah. So, complicated character. Let's go to St. John. Yep. Remember, I left off with a cliffhanger in episode 1 of the Benedict Arnold, part 1, is he's like, I see a future in St. John. This is where I'm going to make back my fortune and make back my reputation. Tell us about the trip.
Well, he arrives at Halifax first on the Lord Middleton, a vessel, and he brings money to spend. And he's heading to St. John, this new city in the new colony of New Brunswick. St. John's a pretty rough place in 1785, right? We know there's poverty, not a lot of cash.
He's coming in hot.
Yeah.
But the landing, let's talk about that landing, because it's an omen of what is about to happen. So like that Halifax trip, he stops in Halifax, visits some friends, but he is suffering from severe gout at the time. He has to hire a pilot to navigate through the very challenging opening in the St. John Harbor, which he's totally capable of doing because he can really sail a ship. He has a lot of experience, but he's suffering from gout, so he has to be underneath the decks. What happens with that pilot? What does he do when he comes into St. John?
Does he miss the channel? Something
totally
goes wrong.
The channel. Okay, you couldn't write this stuff. So he comes in on a very windy day, and he goes, I can't make the opening to the harbor. I'm going to go to the east and try again, I guess, and got caught up in the gale winds and ended up beaching the ship in some cove in Courtney Bay. The wind would have been blowing from east to west, so maybe he actually hit the peninsula. Would there be any cove on that east side?
Well, just to let non-St. Johners know, Courtney Bay is a kind of a muddy harbor just to the east of St. John Harbor. So he might have been driven on that shore that faces the St. John Peninsula, or he might have been driven on the other shore, which is like Bayside Drive, right? But not a good landing in St. John. No,
crashes the ship, and then everyone has to be evacuated. They had to take Benedict Arnold, that commander in the American Revolution, proud man, off on a stretcher because he was suffering from gout. That's how he arrives in St. John, is on a stretcher.
Yeah.
It doesn't get better, does it, with that ship?
Things go from bad to worse because he's got the ship. He's got some goods for trading, maybe some food and alcohol. If you get what the ship manifests as, and while he's indisposed, the locals loot the cargo from his ship.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
They steal all his seed merchandise that he hoped to start his trading business. Now, I don't want to get down on our ancestors from St. John because, it was extreme poverty in St. John at the time. And this would have been around Christmas. So you get a boat full of food stuff from London and it's sitting there and you're like, So thieves ransacked it. He tried to get it back. He actually offered a reward for the capture of the thieves, and there were no takers on that. So it was a complete loss. But that was the unceremonious landing of Benedict Arnold in St. John.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it got really better, but give us a little taste of what he arrived to in St. John. This was a dystopian society at the time.
Yeah, people were still smarting from that election where the many of the lower covers or popular classes in St. John felt that the elite had stolen the election from them for St. John City and County. There's a lot of grievances still amongst the Loyalists, and winter setting in. The city's only 2 years old, so he's one of the few guys with money.
This is, I think, an important thing to understand what St. John, because I think this is what went wrong with Benedict Arnold. He was a good businessman, but he didn't foresee this. The extreme poverty in St. John. This was like the rich were poor.
Yeah.
There was no money in St. John at the time. They were relying upon the British sending supplies, and that was only a 3-year deal. But one of the big things, Greg, there was no currency. Remember, it was a British colony. They had to trade only in British currency. No one had any money.
Right.
So not a great place to be setting up business.
Yeah.
As you were saying, so he arrived with some cash, and this should have been well received from St. Johners is, hey, there's a guy. He just came in boat. and maybe he came into the shore on a stretcher, but hey, he's got 6,000 pounds that he's going to be putting into our economy.
Yeah. So he starts, he does start to get into business, and of course he's extending credit, and he does rent a house first, right, Mark? And then the store was out on Prince William Street, the store and the wharf, because again, Prince William Street back then was on the water, right? So he wanted to be on the water. That makes perfect sense. Now he would do business with anyone, but he does begin to socialize with some of those upper cove elites, but he doesn't really seem to be that interested in politics, right?
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing where he originally set up shop and set up his home, Lower Cove. Do you think he didn't know about what was going on between the Lower Cove and Upper Cove, or it's just like opportunity? There's a home for rent on the Lower Cove. I'm going to grab that. Well, yeah,
I just think it was a good geographic place on the harbor to do business.
I think that was his major thing. It wasn't about where should I socially set up or politically set up. I think it was convenience, because he rented that home in the Lower Cove, and then he bought another home in the Lower Cove and only kept it for 8 months and then decided to move to the Upper Cove. So he was not only setting up business where a lot of the Upper Covers would have set up warehouses and stuff in the Lower Cove. That makes sense. But he actually set up residence. And there was a lot of things in the historical record that, especially the ones that tried to disparage Benedict Arnold, saying, he was in the Lower Cove and he looked down on everyone. His lessers around him, and he didn't get along well with the local residents of the non-elite class. I don't think that was true.
Yeah.
What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think he would deal with. I mean, he did socialize with the elites, but I think he would do business with different people, right? And he hired people. He created some employment, So I think, we don't want to say he's a philanthropist. He's out to make some money, but to make money, you have to invest money in the community.
Yes, but in how he handled people, we saw how he handled his troops, which would not be the elite class in the American Revolution. And he wasn't like that. Yeah. He was a man of honor, and if someone proved their worth, no matter if they had social status or not, you were earning points in Benedict Arnold's book. Yeah. So I don't think he looked down arbitrarily. Remember that thing about arbitrary power and condemnation? Yeah. He really hated that. So I can't imagine him perpetrating that on others. So I don't think he was like that.
On the other hand, he didn't mind being called General Arnold.
Fair enough. But I don't think he was down on poor people and go, ooh, I don't like you. I'm going to look down on you. Let's get him in the business to begin with. So he's setting up business. So he leased a boat to start off his enterprises. And he wanted to do the Jamaican trade run. West Indies.
Yes.
So this was how it worked in the days. So you have stuff coming from St. John, which was mostly lumber. And the best way to make money is you go to West Indies and you trade the lumber. You don't sell it. You trade it for good stuff like sugar and rum and everything that people want. And then you come back and you sell that stuff. And then you make more money than if you were just to sell lumber. So that's what he did. And he got into some headaches with the first captain he hired, which ended up in some lawsuits. It's strange from the historic record. I can't tell if Benedict Arnold sailed with Captain Butler to West Indies for the first time, because that was an unknown thing for Benedict Arnold to do, is actually voyage with the merchandise. He wasn't like, you deliver it for me and bring me back the money. He was a kind of hands-on type of guy, and they were just fighting the entire way. So it was hard to tell if they were fighting live or fighting afterwards in a lawsuit. But it was argument about when to sail, how to unload, everything like this. And Captain Butler kept on delaying. And Benedict Arnold got really upset because he goes, I'm paying you. I should be making the calls. But Butler would have nothing to do with it. His first mission ended up in a financial loss, because by the time they finally got back to St. John, the prices of everything had deflated. So it's not a really great start, but he kept on going, didn't he?
Yeah. So he He also got involved in other parts of the colony, Majorville, which is in the interior, which was a pre-Loyalist settlement. He bought land. He bought and leased different lots around the city. He even set up a trading post on Campobello Island in the Passamaquoddy Bay, which for a long time is connected to the American mainland by a causeway. But of course, it was close to what was then called Moose Island or Eastport. So he's kind of trading there quite close to the international border. He's trying to expand his business into, kind of almost smuggling into the United States.
No, not almost.
Yeah.
Totally smuggling. And remember, he was a smuggler originally before the American Revolution when he was trying to avoid the taxes. There was smuggling to the United States, but there was Benedict Arnold smuggling to the United States, which would have made it much worse. And he had to work with some middlemen. And it seems like he paid them a premium knowing the risk that they were taking. If they ever got caught, one thing, smuggling would have been illegal, but actually making profit for the legendary trader of America, Benedict Arnold, they got a nice little premium if they were successful.
That's right. But there's also almost a lot of folklore along the New Brunswick Maine border about Benedict Arnold's presence and exploits. So again, I see some of those sources are like folklore, but certainly some interesting writing that was done in later decades about Arnold's presence near that international border.
Okay, but let's set up shop. And you talked about the land speculation. So he was getting into trading and he was getting into buying up land thinking, this place is going to take off.
Yeah.
It's depressed right now, but that's opportunity. It's like that classic investor thing is a good investor runs into the building as it's burning and everyone's exiting. Yeah. So he is going, I see a lot of opportunity there. So he gets the lumber yards, he gets the shipyards, and he's building himself up quite an enterprise. I read of the comparison that he was the 18th century Irving with vertical integration of businesses he owned buying from businesses that he owned. Yeah.
Well, we should explain to non-New Brunswick listeners and maybe younger listeners who may not remember the famous Casey Irving, but Casey Irving was the famous industrialist who came to dominate through different industries much of New Brunswick and particularly the St. John area, and made a lot of money from, again, vertical integration, one company buying from the next and trying to keep your supply chain internal.
I just want to completely set up for the listener him in St. John. So the wharfs. Yeah. So he leased the wharf. He wanted to buy it from the city. City council finally said, okay, we're going to lease you a wharf, build a wharf. And it was massive at the time.
Yeah, it was about 120 feet long by the time he built it, and he bought some so-called water lots, offshore water rights. This was close to his warehouse, which was eventually built at the end of Charlotte Street in St. John's South End. Yeah, so he had a pretty big setup there, and he wanted to expand into other types of things, like maybe he wanted to build a distillery at some point, right? So he had big plans.
So a quick little recap: he has wharfs. He has storefront for retail. He had one on Prince William Street. Whether he kept it or not, I'm not sure, but he ended up getting one on King Street. And then he had all of these other places like Campobello Island, you were saying, and up in upriver and all of these kind of things. So he is building a economic juggernaut.
And he also has this major ship built. It's supposed to be the biggest ship of his day, the first big size ocean going vessel, right?
But he is crazy, Greg, because where does he have it built? Does he have it built in the St. John Harbor where he could easily bring it out into the ocean? Remember, this is the first ocean going vessel to be built in New Brunswick.
Yeah. Well, first major one, and it's built in Majorville, which is interior. You sail up the St. John River and you hang a right instead of hanging a left, and it's 300 tons. It's a good size,
it's huge,
and made from white oak, Nehemiah Beckwith, and it's made for the high seas. And Mark, they have to get it through what obstacle?
Well, so they have to get it through what we call Reversing Falls. Original name is Bugbear Falls. Yeah, I had never heard of that before.
Well, for the colonizers, right? Not for the indigenous people. But yeah, they because it was such a difficult. It's rapids, it's tidal, it's this, the 400-mile long St. John River is meeting the Bay of Fundy, and you have about a 20-minute window twice a day to get through.
When the ocean tide and the river flow is exactly matched, and it gives you that still water effect before the rapids just would rip anything apart. So that happened in June of 1786, and I can imagine the people of St. John. And I kind of got a taste of it from reading some of the historic record on this. They would have been coming down basically like it was a NASCAR event, coming down to watch a crash and just go, ooh, look at this. Benedict Arnold actually thinks he could get a 300-ton boat through the reversing falls. Yeah. That's not going to happen. So they're going, oh, it's going to smash, it's going to smash, it's going to smash. And then it makes it through. Yeah. And I bet there was like cheers and cheers and cheers coming from the people. And then a couple of guys going, aw. Aw.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it sails gloriously out of the harbor, and its first run is going to Jamaica. But that didn't go smooth, did it?
No, it ended up with more disputes and one or more lawsuits, right? So it seems that almost everything he did ran into some sort of problem or ended with some sort of litigation.
Yeah, and the litigation on the Sheffield was that there was defects. He ended up suing them, and supposedly the shipbuilder went bankrupt because of it.
Yeah.
That's the history behind that. But then, so he starts doing pretty well for himself as far as business. Like, he has a lot of hiccups. As you said, you couldn't do business in St. John at the time without doing it on credit because people didn't have money. So he was extending credit left and right. He was doing well in business, but you can do well in business if you're not collecting the accounts receivables, you're not doing well. So he had to either sue for recovery of this debt or write it off a lot of times. But we'll get into that in a second. I want to bring his family over.
Yeah, well, and let's just say that I think he had, one son with him fairly early on, but there's this John Sage, whose name appears in the Benedict Arnold narrative, who was born in St. John, 1786, and he has been identified as, I hate to use this term, it's really dated now, illegitimate, not born to Arnold's wife Peggy because she hadn't arrived yet, and he was named in Arnold's will, which is interesting. It was bequeathed 1,200 acres of land in Upper Canada. So there's no direct proof that he's a son with another woman, but most historians have assumed that he was a child born out of wedlock.
Okay, that is scandalous. Now, what was the scuttlebutt around St. John? From what I read, St. John loved a good story about, marital infidelity and everything like that. Did it hit the newspapers at all? Any sort of rumor, speculation?
I don't know. And the other thing, you say scandalous. I think it was a lot more common in the 18th century.
You're probably right with that because the thing is, that would have been weaponized by his enemies. If that was a scandalous thing, they would have jumped on that. So maybe it wasn't such a big deal. I don't know.
It might not have even been that well known at the time, right?
Oh, okay. It came out later.
Wealthy people had often different people living in their households as servants or apprentices. Anyway, Peggy does arrive. He goes to London and comes back in 1787 with his wife and 3 small children. And also, Mark, there's a child born to the couple, right, in St. John. That's George, who's born in September 1787.
Yeah, so let's just do a recap on his kids coming in. So we had Benedict IV, I believe, did come to St. John for a while. Yeah. We had Richard and Henry. So Richard was the one that was business partners with his dad.
And Richard and Henry were from the previous marriage, right? Yeah.
So that was Peggy Mansfield. Then you had 3 kids from Peggy Shippen coming, and their names were Edward, James, and Sophia. Yeah, John Sage that we just talked about. And then George was the only one born in St. John.
So she was pregnant with George when she arrived, right?
So Peggy Shippen arrives on the ship called the Peggy. Now, Greg, I'll ask you this. Peggy was named after which Peggy, because there were two Peggies in Benedict Arnold's life.
I'm assuming his wife, who was still living, right?
Well, you would think it, because it'd be awkward going, Peggy Shippen. I'm naming this vessel after Peggy Mansfield, my first wife. Is that okay? I can't imagine that going over well.
We focus so much on Benedict Arnold, but what would it be like for Peggy, this young socialite, who's sacrificed a lot, who has met the king and the queen, and the king was quite impressed by her, in London, and then she's coming to where? A frontier community on the Bay of Fundy.
And we should say this, St. John loved her.
Well, we don't have a huge documentary record, but she did make connections with the local elite. The trouble is we don't have any feedback from the rank and file, but she was a celebrity.
And I get the feeling, though, she could work a room.
Yeah.
She had extreme charisma, and Benedict Arnold didn't seem to have charisma. He certainly was a brave character and a lot of positive things going on, but he could certainly make enemies. Like he didn't have that political acumen. Peggy, I think, did. And she may have smoothed over some things. This is just speculation. I love to speculate.
Yeah, as a member of the elite, she probably didn't socialize much with the masses.
Well, yes, I should mention his sister Hannah came.
Yes, Sister Hannah, and we'd like to know more about Hannah. She kind of disappears out of the record, so we don't know if she ever married. What happens to Hannah after the Arnolds leave St. John, we don't know.
Yes. And this is an important thing that happened in St. John when Peggy came to town with all the kids. The Arnold family are all together again.
Yep.
For the first time, likely since the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, and what house are they living in?
They're living in a new house, a relatively new house. Everything was new, but it's in the Upper Cove, and it's on the corner of King and Canterbury Street, which was called Church Street back then. And it was a nice home. We're going to put a sketch of it in the show notes, but it was a really nice home for the time, and it was beautifully furnished with the finest furniture from London. Plus, Benedict Arnold started taking to making his own furniture.
Yes.
And I could see him finishing his first chair and go, hey, Ethan Allen, you're not the only one who can make fine furniture.
Yes.
And that's another Ethan Allen joke for me.
Yeah, and they would have had servants. And Mark, listeners might remember our first episode on the election riot. The house was a stone's throw, pardon the use of the term, away from the Mallard House, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So it's
conveniently located.
Yeah, it's almost across the street from the first site of the first riot, and also what became the first legislative assembly of New Brunswick, right? Tavern.
And a good watering hole to say, "Hey, Peggy, I'm just going to be out across the street for a minute."
Yeah,
I'll be back with Peggy in town. Okay, the sedan chair.
Yeah. Oh yes,
the sedan chair. Okay, now, for everyone to know the sedan chair, what it is, it's basically like one of those Roman litters that you are in this very fancy box as carriage, and you're being taken around by two strong men, or four maybe, and being carried around the streets of St. John. Now, in a place of extreme poverty, I can't imagine that going well. I know it was very fashionable in London to get through the narrow streets, so it was very acceptable mode of transportation. You could have your own sedan chair. You could rent it almost like a taxi. But Greg, what would that have been like? They had a sedan chair. Was Peggy Shippen going around town being carried by servants?
I'm assuming Peggy, maybe one or more of the children, maybe even General Arnold, right? So, it's kind of an elite thing. It's not necessarily royalty. And Mark, we know about the sedan chair because when Arnold was getting ready to leave St. John in 1791, there was an auction of household effects, and the sedan chair is listed of some of the amongst the contents, and we'll post a list of the contents on our show notes for people if you're really interested in what Benedict Arnold was selling.
So he was going around town. He was mixing with the elite. That's where his friendships lay. But he was not getting involved in politics. He goes, I don't want anything to do with that. I want to make money. And it wasn't just like a selfish thing that I want to have nice stuff, though he did want to have nice stuff. He was really concerned with his family. his growing family and making sure they were provided for.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into business. Let's get into a business turn.
Yeah. So he's away summer of 1788.
So there was a fire at the warehouse. He was constantly suing people for the debt because he kept on extending credit. To his credit, he was extending credit because people couldn't afford this. We should know about that, though, is this was not uncommon. There was a lot of anti-Benedict Arnold writers out there that tried to go, oh, he was a litigious monster. Yeah, everyone was doing this. So the lawsuits that were happening at the time, you were basically going to court and saying, you owe me money. The court would often just appoint 3 merchants to sit down, probably at the bar, and go, you got a debt or you don't have a debt. And then the court would ratify that determination and go, you owe money. So it wasn't this big, long, drawn out, like the lawsuits of today. Nothing like the lawsuits that it's just to confirm you owe me money and you got to pay. Benedict Arnold was really good about this too, is he would go, if you had means, you need to pay me. But if you didn't have means and you were a family person and the only option was to send you to debtor's prison, supposedly he was quite compassionate.
Yeah, and he was, on the other hand, he did file about 50 lawsuits, didn't he?
But under his name, we don't know how many would have been under his business because it could have been a lot of the Munson Hayt.
Yeah, and he was also sued himself.
Oh, he was sued because that's the thing. It was a litigious society. Is when I sued someone, Greg, they countersued me. To say, well, no, you owe me money. And whether there was any basis for that, it extended things. And I think it was probably a strategy to stay out of debtor's prison.
Yeah. So he loses his warehouse. His son Henry was in the building, may have been injured, but Benedict's not even in the city. He's in London or someplace, right, when it happens. And there is an insurance policy which shocks people, right, on the building and the contents.
It was shocking, I guess, for the local population because insurance was something that wasn't really known back then. There might have been maritime insurance, but
ships.
To insure property on land against things like fire, it basically was viewed as a kind of a gambling system, which I guess it is. It's gambling that, something bad is going to happen and I'm going to put in some money in case it does. So he does insure it. And then Munson Hayt, his business partner that he hooked up with early on, who had a lot of connections but didn't have means. He kept on borrowing from Benedict Arnold throughout this time. Like before the warehouse fire, he owed at one time, Greg, £2,000. That's a lot of money. That would have been like equivalent of $1 million that he owed Benedict Arnold and today's currency. And Benedict Arnold goes, it's time to pay, Munson. It's time to pay. And Munson kept on going, checks in the mail. No, I'll get to it and stuff. And finally he goes, I'm suing you. So he ends up suing and then there's countersuits. But there is this animosity now between the two business partners. Then the warehouse burns and then the insurance comes out. And then we had that thing from the opening of episode 1, that exchange between Munson Hayt and Benedict Arnold in the streets of St. John saying, you burned down your warehouse for the insurance money. And that spread around St. John and it killed Arnold's business. No one wanted to do business with a guy who would burn down his own warehouse. What is the likelihood that happened? 0.
The guy who wasn't on this side of the Atlantic at the time. So
probably more of a plot to go, I want to disparage this guy because I owe him £2,000. I'm going to destroy him in another way so I won't have to pay this. But Arnold, I guess luckily for Hayt, because in other exchanges, knowing Benedict Arnold, he would have said pistols at dawn and had a duel. How dare you accuse me of such things, especially since my son was in the warehouse at the time and almost died. How dare you do this? And then the whole insurance thing is, I'm sorry, it was £5,000 of insurance. There was about £5,000 worth of goods in there. He wasn't over-insured from what I read.
No.
So in good insurance scam, Greg, is you overinsure.
Yeah.
And it's not like he wouldn't have been able to sell that merchandise. Maybe collecting the money is a problem, but there was no motivation for this.
No.
So he goes, I'm suing you for slander. First time ever in New Brunswick. And then, wow, this is Law and Order St. John, Greg. Law and Order St. John, an intriguing case.
Oh, there's so many people who know one another, and so many people that have sued one another, and so many people who have been sued, and so many people who owe money to one another. It gets very messy, right?
You know who did well during all this time? The lawyers.
Lawyers, yeah.
The lawyers, which I think probably stoked the flames of litigation, going, Benedict Arnold, you really should sue. Oh, Munson Hayt, you should sue. All you guys, you should really sue.
Yeah. But Mark, as the son of a lawyer, I asked the question, were the lawyers always paid?
No, they were not. But here's the thing with Benedict Arnold, he would be considered a great client.
Yeah.
Because he did pay his bills.
Yeah.
That's the client I would like to have.
Yeah.
So he really helped out the local legal bar in keeping them afloat during those lean years. Yeah. Well, as you said, everyone was suing everyone, and Benedict Arnold was fair. He wouldn't just go, I'm not going to sue the elite because that would be politically damaging. He sued Edward Winslow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that did not go over well in the elite community. If you were of the elite class, the lower covers, it doesn't matter. You owe me money. Your word is your bond, and I'm going to collect on it. And especially after the warehouse fire, I think he was hurting. And it seems like the litigation really started ramping up. And that's when he goes, Munson, you got to pay. And all these things happen. But you have this thing. This is like set up perfectly against Arnold. Arnold hires Ward Chipman, Jonathan Bliss, as his legal counsel going against Elias Hardy. And we remember that from episode 1 of the election riot of 1785 to know those characters. So here's the jury. I'll start with the jury and then I'll move to the judges. The jury is absolutely stacked against Benedict Arnold. I wonder if they had any exclusion that I could go, I want this jury member off. Yeah. 3 out of the 12 jury members signed the petition against the 1785 election results. So they would have been really not happy with Jonathan Bliss and Ward Chipman. Yeah. Then you had 7 out of 12 had been on the losing side of an Arnold debt lawsuit.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the recipe for it. Let's have some revenge on this guy. Yeah. And then 9 out of 12 had served on a previous jury on a Hayt-Arnold case where they sided in favor of Hayt.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Yeah. And then let's bring in the judges. We have Isaac Allen. No legal training, was not a lawyer, but somehow became a judge in the province of New Brunswick and worked with Hayt on boards.
Yes.
So they knew each other. Then Joshua Upham, no legal training. So 2 judges, no legal training, a jury of your enemies hearing this case. The absolute defense to slander is the truth.
Yeah.
Is you prove that what you said was true, then it's not slander, even if it destroys someone's reputation. Yeah. The truth came out. There were 2 witnesses that appeared, and they identified as Black Loyalist. And they came and said, we were actually there with Henry Arnold the night of the fire. And I couldn't quite tell if it were the 2 individuals, the 2 workers who accidentally lit the fire. They were going up to the top floor with candles to grab some lumber. And they seemed like all 3 of them were going, Henry and the 2 people identifying as Black Loyalists. And then someone accidentally dropped the candle. Fire ensues. Everyone found them to be extremely credible. Yep. Their stories were consistent. They had nothing to lose, nothing to gain by giving this testimony. So the jury had no choice really to say, yeah, you know what, Munson Hayt, you didn't make your case. We are siding in favor of Arnold. Arnold had sued for £5,000. And again, that would have been a couple of million in Canadian nowadays. So it was a huge thing. And the jury goes, we recommend a very low amount of compensation because, come on, we're talking about Benedict Arnold. What is his reputation actually worth? And the judges go, yeah, you're right, jury. 20 shillings.
Yeah.
What a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Huh?
We're editorializing here as to the motives, right? But we can only, it's a very reasonable inference, right? That you've made your legal point, but what's your reputation, right?
What's your reputation? But 20 shillings is an absolute slap in the face when you've basically lost all your business reputation. No one will do business in town with you because someone accused you of burning down your own warehouse for the insurance money. And that's worth more than 20 shillings.
And as Barry Wilson points out in his excellent biography on Benedict Arnold, American historians ever since that time have used this lawsuit as a further example of what a nasty guy Benedict Arnold was.
So this big blow.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, no one wrote on this until 1861. There's an article that appears in Harper's Magazine in the United States that a riot took place outside the Arnold residence on King Street after the judgment.
A riot in St. John?
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Yeah. And it was outside Arnold's house. I got rowdy. Supposedly, local magistrates didn't intervene. British troops arrived, right? And supposedly then that riot influenced Arnold's decision to leave St. John, to sell off his stuff and go back to London.
What a great story, Greg. What a great story. Now, as a historian, are you going to kill my great story?
Well, yes and no. Other writers, magazine article writers, different people have picked it up, right? But according to Wilson, who wrote what I see as the definitive biography of Benedict Arnold in Canada with all the background, about 20 years ago, there's almost no documentation proving that it ever happened. It was never mentioned in public record until 1861, and that was by an American historian writing in the United States. The other thing I'll just throw into the pile here, Mark, is that Benedict Arnold puts an ad for an auction of his household goods. The auction is going to take place on September 11th, right? 1791. The final judgment of the court was on September 13th.
Oh.
So it looks like Arnold was already planning to leave. Maybe. Okay.
That makes sense considering that his business was in shambles after the accusations.
But then, Mark, history gets messy. There's a letter that the historian Paul Craven found in his book, 2013, A Legal History of Charlotte County, New Brunswick, a letter from David Owen, who was a wealthy landowner on Campobello, to his brother in Wales, claiming this was written in 1791, that Arnold had been, quote, burnt in effigy. Because we forgot to mention that the riot story has Arnold being burnt in effigy. There's a straw dummy of Arnold, it's hoisted up on a rope when they burn him, and that's a protest or a threat, right? Or social condemnation. Again, it's possible to read this if the riot happened and the burning in effigy happened, because we still don't know. Maybe it was put up by Hayt and his comrades, right?
I like that conspiracy theory. Can you expand on that? Because did you find something to support that?
No, just an inference that, it's like you think the average person in the community is not going to give a darn about this lawsuit between two wealthy people. But if Hayt wants to get payback, and, it's kind of like he might get some of his buddies together. He's an ex-army guy. He has friends in the community. He's connected. He's part of the elite. I mean, he's broke, but he's part of the elite, right?
It's more plausible than the other because Benedict Arnold, he won in law, but lost because he got slapped in the face with 20 shillings. Like, why would that incite violence and go, well, now we want to really take it out on Benedict. Yeah. He was already down.
And he's a colonial. It's true he fought for the wrong side to begin with, according to the Loyalists, but he's a colonial who fought for the British Army, and some of them would have served under him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so the letter says, he had been in real danger until saved by the military, meaning Arnold, and, quote, Mrs. Arnold was in fits the whole day. Arnold supposedly then traveled to Campobello, remember, he had a trading place there where he was in considerable danger as people on this borderland island remembered his exploits at New London, where many lost a brother or some relation. So there, we're getting back to this idea that there's Americans living nearby who fought in the Continental Army, who maybe fought alongside Arnold early in the war. Craven, who's an academic, concludes that Owen's letter is sufficient evidence that the riot took place. So we have the Wilson interpretation, meaning no riot, no burning in effigy. And then we have the Craven interpretation based on the one letter. To be fair to Wilson, David Owen was not in St. John when the alleged incident took place, but it seems too much of a coincidence, knowing those details in 1791 and matching them with the details later that start to be reported in 1861, right?
I'm putting you on the spot. Where do you lean? Happened or didn't happen?
I don't know. I lean towards Wilson because his book's so carefully researched. He doesn't seem to be aware of the letter because he wasn't researching Campobello Island. He was researching St. John, right?
And just looking at evidence to have that thing surface that came from the 1700s.
1791, the same year.
1790, like that's contemporaneously to the events. And then it surfaces in 1860 in that article.
Yeah.
I think there's enough to suggest something did happen. But okay, now we have Arnold finally going, okay, that's it. I'm packing up my family. Peggy, it's time to pack your bags. No, you're leaving your sedan chair. You're not taking that.
Yeah.
And we're off to London. We tried with St. John and we failed. So he left it was 1791?
Yeah, soon after. Yeah.
1791, and he never came back to St. John.
Yeah, he left. He had other adventures in the 1790s. Most of them did not work out well, but he kept writing it because he had business. He had property there. He had debts to collect. And also he had friends, including people who owed him money. And that block of lots that he bought near your alma mater, St. John High, right, was sold as late as 1797. He was trying to sell off his wharf, and meantime, the locals, welcome to St. John, kept stealing rocks from his wharf.
Yeah, and it was abandoned too. Like the wharf was abandoned. Benedict Arnold was not making anything from it. And someone from city council goes, you know what? It's still in your name and you owe us some taxes.
Yeah.
And they ended up going to city council, and Jonathan Bliss, representing Benedict Arnold in that matter, and wrote to Benedict Arnold going, you're not going to get any love from city council. They're going to side against you. And they did. They said, you owe us taxes plus penalties.
Yeah. And he had this correspondence, but he often would make negative remarks about St. John. Arnold wished that he had the power to transfer his gout to some of my good friends at St. John, right?
Give us the legacy of Benedict Arnold and St. John.
Well, there's these memories, and the memory of him being here and being, involved in litigation, and the famous traitor for the American Revolution. And there's a plaque at 20 King Street put up by the New Brunswick Historical Society. I think he's an underreported story in St. John's past. A lot of the people don't know the details. But other than the plaque and kind of this vague memory that, he was here, there's not a lot of memory of him being here and what happened.
But he really tried to help New Brunswick out. Like, yes, he wanted to help himself out financially. He saw opportunity, but he was a founder of industry in the community.
Yep.
And then was given nothing but guff the entire way along.
Yeah.
And no one would honor their commitments to Benedict Arnold. And finally, you know what? I think your original name for this episode was the town that defeated Benedict Arnold, and it kind of did. And I would say unfairly so.
Yeah. And you think about all the battles he had fought, literal battles. He just couldn't master this poverty-stricken, divided city. He died in 1801 of dropsy, and Peggy sold off property in order to cover her husband's debts. She died of cancer just 2 years later. She was only 44.
Tell me if these were actually his dying words, because it seemed too perfect. The quote is, "Let me die in this old uniform in which I fought my battles. May God forgive me ever putting on another." And scene.
Yeah.
Did that happen? Did he say that?
I don't know.
Like, I think he probably had regrets as it didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he was like, totally, I did the wrong thing, because he...
No, he's not. I don't think he's one of those guys.
No, I don't think he was one of those guys. I didn't get the impression that he would go, no, I did the wrong thing. He goes, geez, I wish that had worked out better.
Yeah, as our outgoing premier in New Brunswick said, he was a man of his convictions. Right? Yeah. So getting back to John Andre, remember, one of the reasons so many British officers disliked Arnold is they felt that Major Andre, the spy master, around the time of the plot, had been caught and hanged as a spy, whereas Arnold got off free, got paid, and then was made a general British Army. So if you contrast where we've already mentioned Major Andre, a hero to the British Empire, was given a place in Westminster Abbey, and then his remains were brought from Tappan, New York in the 1820s and put in the crypt in Westminster Abbey. So he's kind of considered a hero of the British Empire. You contrast that with Benedict and Peggy's final resting place, Mark.
Yes, and this is an interesting one, and we will put the picture of Benedict Arnold's final resting place on our show notes. But he is buried in a crypt in St. Mary's Church in London, which has now been repurposed as a kindergarten.
Yeah.
So there is the kids' fish tank right next to the plaque that says, "Here lies Benedict Arnold and Margaret Shippen."
Yeah.
And there are pictures that the kids have drawn of their favorite fish kind of hanging right above that plaque where Benedict Arnold's body lies. Now, it'd be interesting to know if Benedict Arnold and Peggy Shippen would actually mind that, because they love kids from the historic records. So maybe that's the kind of vibe that they would like, but, not what we traditionally would call the respect deserving of someone of that rank and that had such a major historical impact. We can say for good or bad, he changed the game.
Yeah. And it's in the basement of a church, right? That it was repurposed, right, for a modern purpose. Yeah.
Benedict Arnold was canceled. And there seems to be an understanding now that it's more complicated.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a willingness to look at some of the good things that he accomplished. And even with that crypt, there's a plaque in there now. It wasn't originally there, but it was a plaque that was put there jointly by the British government and the United States government saying, we were enemies and now we're friends. And it's time to reconcile some of these differences. And maybe it is part of the Benedict Arnold story, is something that has to be reconciled.
Yeah. And Mark, I mean, you've got a monument for Major Andre that was actually erected in New York, Tappan, New York, in the 1870s. Is it time for a Benedict Arnold monument in St. John? We've been talking about taking statues down, like and changing names and things. Is it time to try something different with Benedict Arnold's legacy?
Possibly. Now, is there such thing as an apology statue that we could put up and go, so sorry from the people of St. John that we gave you such a hard time. We stole your stuff as soon as you arrived. We didn't pay our debts, and we drove you out of town in some sort of riot, maybe burned you in effigy. So sorry. Here's a statue.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Mark. I don't have any. I have no Loyalist blood here, so I can't make any comment.
But with that, Greg, that is the podcast, and proof, once again, St. John, nothing happened here. I'd like to take a moment to thank a few of our listeners who have been really supportive of the podcast. Moira Vandeverin, Faye Hanley, and Greg Fechner. Sometimes it's lonely for Greg and me on this side of the microphone, so we appreciate your nice comments. And if you are enjoying the podcast and would like to support our mission to spread the rich history of St. John, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or Spotify. A 5-star rating is always good. Follow us on Facebook and share our post. And of course, tell your friends and family about the podcast. New episodes are released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. We hope to have everyone back to hear more fascinating nothingness on St. John, Nothing Happened Here.
Thank you for listening to St. John Nothing Happened Here. To learn more, join us at www.nothinghappenedhere.ca or connect with us on Facebook. Other means of communication include, but are not limited to, telegrams, smoke signals, and carrier pigeons. However you want to reach us, we want to hear from you.